2025 is shaping up to be a very busy year in HCM compliance and those issues that matter to our HR colleagues and practitioners. AI is obviously going to continue to be top of mind. I think we're still at the beginning of what I would call the AI legislation and regulatory revolution. There are proposals around the world, around the country, and around the world as legislators and regulators are grappling with how to make sure that we're using AI in a safe way that protects the right of employees, but also takes advantage of the opportunities of new technology. So that's definitely one area that I could see being very busy in the next year, in 2025. With every change in administration in Washington, we tend to see changes in how the law looks at things like salary thresholds for who's an exempt or non-exempt worker. So we're seeing activity there. We also expect to see activity in things like how to define what an employee is versus an independent contractor for those employers who are using gig workers. So those are two areas in the wage and hour field that I think will be busy in 2025, continue to be busy. Also, pay transparency. I think in the next administration, based on what we've seen in the past, we might not see federal laws related to pay transparency, but that just means that we're going to continue to see states acting in that space and making sure that there are pay transparency laws in the books as we see that trend sweeping through the country. I think what we are seeing in terms of remote work is a lot of focus on who is a worker. When it comes to a state law, who does it govern? Does it govern a person who's sitting in New Jersey but is working for a company based in New York? So laws about pay transparency, for example, are going to have to decide whether their laws impact a worker who spends time remotely. We're also seeing how that might impact taxation with multi-jurisdiction employees and how they can be properly taxed in a jurisdiction. There's a lot of differences and nuances between the states and how that's being handled, and that's definitely something that'll continue in the new year. Most of the United States doesn't have a specific AI law, so as an HR leader, you could think this doesn't necessarily impact me. The thing is, obviously, we have existing laws that impact how we use AI and make sure that we're using AI in a way that's non-discriminatory, because we have existing non-discrimination laws that impact the use of AI. But I think more fundamentally, what HR leaders should be thinking about is how do I implement and bring AI into my workforce in a way that my employees trust, or that the candidates who are looking to apply to my jobs trust, because people don't use technology if they don't trust the technology. So while it sounds like a compliance issue when you say you have to use AI in a responsible way that complies with the laws, it's also a strategic decision for HR leaders as they think about how can I make sure that my company is using AI in a way that builds trust among the employees and my customers and my candidates. I would say something similar for pay transparency. Many states have pay transparency laws, and they're asking HR leaders to really rethink how they're using pay as a strategy for retention and for recruiting. When you think about pay transparency, those states that don't have a pay transparency law, candidates and employees are still interested in that as a concept. So again, while pay transparency is a compliance issue, a compliance requirement in many jurisdictions, for HR leaders, it's also a strategic lever that they can use when they're thinking about total compensation for their employees and candidates, and making sure that their pay strategy really reflects the goals of the company. It's hard to say how the Trump administration will handle it, but we have seen different laws in states focused on DE&I issues. For example, pay transparency is an issue that's focused on making sure that we're minimizing as much as possible the gap between workers and protected groups. And while that focus started out being making sure that women were being paid the same for similar work as men, we're seeing a lot of states expand that beyond the man and woman categories to races and to sexual orientation, to religion. So we're seeing a lot of states looking at diversity with a broader lens than just man and woman. And I do expect that to continue in the next year. I'll start with AI. So the laws differ, right? And there's a lot of nuances between AI laws, but we're definitely seeing some trends and things that HR leaders should be focusing on now. When we look across the laws that have been passed or the proposals that are being considered, we notice a focus on transparency and notice. So making sure that AI is being used in a transparent and obvious way to the end user, and that the user has a high level understanding of what data the AI model is using. This is a fundamental part of a lot of the laws that we're seeing. I would also say that HR leaders need to focus on ways to mitigate bias in the use of AI. So consider regular testing of algorithmic predictions before and after a product is rolled out. And this is something that isn't something that they can just hand off to their vendors. They really need to be taking an active role in thinking about bias in the use of their AI tools, and make sure that the people who are using the tools have the information they need in order to know how to use it properly. For pay transparency, I'd say it's all about your pay strategy, data, and communication. Those are kind of the three prongs that I would put pay transparency compliance in. And you need to be thinking about all of those in order to ensure that pay transparency advances and doesn't impede your efforts to recruit talent and retain the talent that you have. I'll say that HR technology can actually accelerate these analyses that go into these laws. They make things a lot easier, not essential, but a lot easier, because they give companies access to some of the reliable information that is needed to make these decisions. So specifically, what I recommend, I think HR leaders need to first review their pay policies and their job descriptions. So make sure that your company has a clear pay policy, which assesses and documents how you determine who gets paid what and the pay ranges for positions. For job descriptions, for each role in the company, there should be a job description that summarizes the responsibilities and tasks of somebody in that role. So those job descriptions should be up to date and accurately reflect the work in each role. I think too many times the job descriptions just kind of roll over from person to person and generation to generation, and they're not really an accurate reflection of what somebody's doing. And in order to have a good pay strategy and really make decisions based on similar work, you need to think about what task the person is actually doing. So then when you think about strategy, the next part, after you think about strategy, the next part is data. So you look at the market. What are others in your industry and location paying for that job? Compare your pay ranges to benchmarks in your geographic location and in your industry. Usually we recommend using real-time benchmarking data, which is based hopefully on large data sets, so you can have a really reliable and accurate and relevant data set for your workforce and for your industry. So in addition to the external looking for the benchmarking, you want to look internally, right? So you look at your current workforce and figure out what people are making in their current roles. And what you're doing here is you're looking for internal equity issues. Are there gaps between people who are doing similar work that isn't justified by some legal justification like location or experience or performance? How are workers comparing in the same job to the pay range that you might want to post for that particular role based on the benchmarking information that you collected? And then the third big pillar for how to kind of establish a pay transparency compliance policy is really communication. So I think managers and HR practitioners should really feel comfortable explaining to employees what the company's pay strategy is and why their particular pay falls in the published range or it doesn't, right? So how are you going to address whether a current employee is making pay outside of the salary range that's posted for a particular job? How do you prepare your managers for those conversations? You should also be prepared to have those conversations with new applicants who are curious about how your company makes these pay decisions. These are conversations that a lot of managers aren't used to having because pay tended to be something that we didn't really talk about. But with the new pay transparency laws, we really need to make sure that we're all comfortable talking about the reasons why, talking about pay, and doing so in a way that hopefully shows, that your company is invested in a fair and equitable workplace when it comes to pay. There is still room for DE&I programs in today's workforce. There are programs that are actually mandated by the federal government in terms of making sure that there's diverse pools for different, contractor opportunities. There are also ways to make sure that a program looks to elevate people from all different backgrounds and not just specific backgrounds. And there's definitely ways to do this in a way that satisfies the current laws. I think we're going to hear a lot more about how to do this specifically as the next couple of years roll out. But it's something that a lot of companies aren't getting rid of completely, but just re-looking at it and reimagining what a DE&I program can look like in today's workforce. So employers, when they're dealing with looking at different laws and looking at changes in regulations, I think it can be something that appears challenging. But what I really do recommend that HR leaders do is thinking about the underlying strategy, the compliance ethos of your company, and work and build on that. And let me give you an example. ADP started using artificial intelligence years ago, way before the advent of generative AI. And we built a set of ethical principles that would govern how we used AI. And those include things like transparency and notice, human oversight, mitigating bias, monitoring, a governance program. And all of those things have really dictated how we've used artificial intelligence throughout the last 6, 7, 8 years. Now, with the advent of generative AI, we look at those principles and we say, are there any nuances of generative AI that might require changing some particular set of principles or evolving some principle or the other? Those principles, though, have really stood the test of time, and they've really helped us dictate how we're going to use AI in a responsible way for our associates, our clients, our client employees, and candidates. We are able to build on those and evolve those, but the principles stay. And I think that's the same principle that I would recommend HR leaders look at when they're thinking about compliance strategies. It's not something that employers should feel like they have to play whack-a-mole and try to comply with this law or that law or the other law. It's really think about a cohesive program that would obviously comply with the laws across the country, but really a program that reflects the ethics and compliance philosophy of your company. And when there are changes, you can make changes to the nuances of it, the change in regulation, but the principles stay the same, and they give you kind of a grounding point that the HR leaders can feel confident will bring them from regulatory change to regulatory change in the future.